Hello friends, today's nifty building is the Old Don Jail.
It's a nifty building.
That's not a spelling error. This jail is old enough that that's how they used to spell it. This, I think, is one of the most interesting pre-Confederation buildings still standing in Toronto. Most of the other buildings that exist from this long ago are just sort of cottages or storefronts that just happen to have survived for this long, or churches or a lighthouse or something with a very specific purpose, and it doesn't really make sense for it to ever be torn down. Having gone to school in Kingston, the building does look familiar to me. It's built exactly like all of the other reform prisons that were built in Kingston around the same time. And much like all of the other reform prisons, while it was critiqued as being a palace for prisoners due to the beautiful exterior, on the inside conditions were pretty much deplorable. I do think that the ones in Kingston maybe do look a little more Disneyland than this one. It was so bad that people put here pre-trial would actually plead guilty in the hope that they would get moved to even one of the other reform prisons in Kingston. It actually looks quite a bit nicer today than it would have even 10 years ago because of all of the extensive renovations that have happened since 2013. Ownership has transferred over to this hospital next door, and they've done a good job of really bringing it back up to what it would have looked like according to sort of the original plans made by William Thomas, a very prominent architect in the area. A relationship between some sort of health facility and a prison being both on the same property on the side of the river goes back to pre-Confederation days when originally there would be a internment home for idiots, and that was eventually turned into isolation wards for the smallpox or epidemic or the tuberculosis epidemic, and eventually became the rehabilitation center that it is today. Although a lot of the renovations aimed to remove that sort of prison-y vibe to it, they did leave a few sort of nods to its history in place. Quite a few hangings used to happen here, and up until the 1930s, the hangings would actually happen outside here. These wooden blocks are all that remain of the original gallows. The newer ones are on the inside. While most of the windows have had the bars removed, the windows where there are no staff or patients are still barred up with the original prison bars. As well as the death row cells, still all in place. The death row history of this prison really is what makes it notable. This is where Canada's last two executions and most of the most famous executions all took place here. The last two took place in 1962, which are a lot more recent than I thought it would be. These two men were hanged well after we had stopped using the death penalty as a punishment for murder. They were even informed that they were the last two people who were going to be hanged, which wasn't much consolation. Whenever you try to learn about escapes that happened here, there are three big ones that always come up, well, three and a bit. In 1919, a wizard named Frank McCullough used a sleeping potion to put the guard to sleep, and then he jumped over the wall. In 1946, the Polka Dot Gang attempted to create a human pyramid, and a few people managed to climb out and over the wall before getting nabbed and brought back in, which is kind of funny. And then I think the Canada-wide most interesting escape story, or escapes story, is the Boyd Gang. So the Boyd Gang is just what we call everybody who was in the cell block with Boyd when he attempted his first escape, and using that language you can tell where this is going. So the way the prison is laid out is there are sort of 4 cells in a cell block, and that cell block has a metal door and a metal grill on the windows, and then the cells inside are all just sort of wooden cages that just have a bed and a bucket in them, which means that at night, if you could somehow cut your way out of the wooden cells, you would then just have to cut your way out of the window, and all 4 of you could escape, assuming you cut the other guys free as well, which means pretty much with just a hacksaw, you could get out. And one of the other people in the cell block with Boyd was one-legged Lenny. Lenny had a peg leg, except it wasn't a normal peg leg, it was actually a hacksaw. So using Lenny's leg saw, they cut everybody out, cut out the window, and all escaped. The gang then just spread out once they escaped. Some of them went to Montreal and killed some cops, and some of them stayed in Toronto and tried to rob some more banks. After they were all captured again, they were all, for some reason, put back into the same cell block. They did check to make sure that Lenny's leg was actually a peg leg, not a hacksaw this time. And they did put them in metal cells inside the metal cell block, so that this time in a single night you couldn't cut your whole way out. You could only, cut one person out at most. So this was considered adequate, I guess. However, all 4 cells did use the same key. So if you just created one fake key, you could open all 4 cells, and then the window still just had 4 bars on it. You're out. Considering Lenny's leg wouldn't work as a hacksaw, Boyd came up with a really clever system. He had his lawyer bring him some legal advice, except instead of it being legal advice, it was a hacksaw, as well as a blank key, basically. Now, the only trick was to get the actual pattern of the key from the guard. Willie came up with a really just ingenious way to get the key. He took it. Now, obviously, Willie knew that the guard wouldn't just let him cut the key right in front of him using the key blank and the hacksaw. So instead what he did was he dehydrated himself enough that, and I haven't because I'm not that committed to this video, that when he pressed it into his hand, it would leave an imprint of the shape of the key on his hand. And then he returned the key to the guard, classic prank, just taking the key for a while. And then with the markings on his hand, he was able to cut the blank into the shape of a key. And then that night they all opened everything up and using the hacksaw that the lawyer had snuck in, cut the window again, and they had all escaped yet again. There were some pretty spicy headlines. There wasn't much else going on in the news, so this was a lot of fun for almost every form of media, and there were big roving gangs of police and citizen groups trying to all find these guys that were, it turns out, just hiding in a barn up the river. They were cold and didn't have any supplies with them and weren't doing so hot. So they were eventually all captured, brought back to prison. 2 were executed, and actually Boyd himself was let out of prison in 1966. So just a couple of years later. It seems weird to me that he worked so hard to escape and then ended up just getting out so soon. Although most confusingly, he also was sentenced to 8 life sentences. So I don't really understand what's going on there. Anyway, that's my really quick summary of the Boyd gang story. There are some, full hour-long podcasts that are really good listens to about it, so I'd suggest you look into a few of those. Anyway, now you know all about the Don jail and some of the fun and honestly mostly less fun stuff that went on here, and just another nifty building to see here in Toronto. Have a beautiful day. Gee whiz.